The Galactic Council went silent after seeing one human file. The message came in at 3:47 in the morning, and it was not the kind of message you ignore. I had been awake already. Not because I am one of those people who wakes up before sunrise and feels good about it. I was awake because I had been staring at my ceiling for 2 hours, running the same problem through my head over and over again like a wheel stuck in mud. The Galactic Council wanted our file. They had sent the request 6 days ago, and everyone above me in the chain of command had quietly looked at their shoes and said, "You handle it, Oliver." My name is Oliver Grant. I am 34 years old. I work for the United Earth Diplomatic Office, which sounds far more impressive than it is. For the last 3 years, my job had been to sit in a small office on the 14th floor of a building in Geneva and translate documents. Not exciting documents, tax treaty documents, trade agreement appendices, the kind of paperwork that puts other paperwork to sleep. Then the Keth made contact, and everything changed. That was 18 months ago. Humanity joined the Galactic Council as a provisional member 9 months after first contact. The Keth were patient and thorough teachers. They explained the council structure, the languages, the centuries-old customs, the unspoken rules about speaking order and diplomatic posture. They told us what to expect. They told us other species would be curious. They said there would be a routine file exchange, a species profile submission, nothing to worry about. Everyone told me it was nothing to worry about. I sat at my desk at 3:47 in the morning, looking at what I had compiled over the last 6 days, and I was very worried. The request from the council was specific. They wanted the standard species profile. Section 1 was a biological overview. Section 2 was a historical record summary. Section 3 covered psychological and social behavior patterns. Section 4 documented technological development timelines. Section 5 was military capacity and conflict record. Section 6 addressed cultural values and philosophical foundations. Every species submitted this file when they joined. It was the first impression. It was the document that told the rest of the galaxy who you were and where you came from. The Keth had walked me through some examples to give me a sense of the format. The Vrelian file was 12 pages, clean and organized, mostly about their agricultural civilization and their philosophy of measured growth. The Luminari file was 22 pages, written in a style so graceful that reading it felt like listening to music. The Marath submitted 8 pages and included 3 short poems, because of course they did. I had been working on ours for 6 days. It was currently 411 pages long, and I had not finished Section 5 yet. That was the problem. I want to be very clear about something. I had not invented any of it. I had not exaggerated anything. I had not added dramatic color or selected the most alarming examples to make us look more impressive. I had simply gone to the archives, to the history books, to the academic databases, to the peer-reviewed scientific literature, and I had pulled out the facts. The honest, documented, verified facts. And the honest facts about humanity filled 411 pages before I had even gotten through all of our recorded conflicts. There is something deeply uncomfortable about seeing your own species from the outside. I had spent 6 days doing exactly that, and the result was sitting on my screen at 3:47 in the morning looking back at me like a mirror I had not been entirely prepared to look into. I called my supervisor at 4 in the morning. His name is George Callum, and he is the kind of man who has worked in international diplomacy for 30 years and developed the very specific ability to sound calm about anything. I had seen him receive news that would have sent most people running, and he always responded the same way. A long pause, 2 or 3 quiet words, and then a decision. "George," I said, "I think our file is going to cause a problem." There was a pause. "How bad?" "Do you remember when you told me to include everything?" "I remember." "And do you remember when I asked if you were sure about that, and you said absolutely, no editing, complete accuracy?" A longer pause. I heard him set something down, "Send it to me." He called back 20 minutes later. He did not sound calm. "Oliver," he said slowly, carefully, "the way you say words when you are measuring each one before it leaves your mouth. This is all accurate. You did not add anything that is not documented and sourced. Every single line has a reference. I can send you the bibliography. It is 60 pages on its own." Another pause, a very long one. I could hear him breathing. I could almost hear him thinking. "Send it," he said finally. His voice had settled into that steady place it goes when he has made a decision and will not be moving away from it. "Send the whole thing. If they ask us who we are, we tell them who we are. We do not clean it up. We do not soften the edges. We do not select the presentable sections and leave the rest in a drawer. You send exactly what you compiled. George, Section 5 alone, is 93 pages. I know. The Vrelian file is 12 pages total, the whole thing. I know that too. George, we are going to walk into that council looking like." Oliver, his voice was quiet and completely immovable. "Send it." I sent it on a Tuesday morning at 6:14 a.m. Geneva time. I attached a brief cover letter, standard format, confirmed that it was complete and unaltered, and hit the transmission button. It felt, in a way I cannot entirely explain, like jumping off something. Nothing happened on Tuesday. Nothing happened on Wednesday, though I checked my message queue approximately 40 times. By Thursday morning, everything happened at once. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. This session was not scheduled. It was not on any calendar. It had not been requested through the normal channels or preceded by any of the standard diplomatic communications that were supposed to precede formal sessions. It was the political equivalent of a fire alarm going off in a building where nothing was supposed to be on fire. I found out about it when I received a formal summons. Not a meeting request, not a politely worded invitation. A summons, written in the Council's official language and translated into 6 Earth languages, which meant they had put deliberate and serious effort into making absolutely certain I understood it correctly. The summons said I was to appear before the full Council in 48 hours for what they called a file clarification session. It outlined the location, the time, the protocol, the dress expectations. It was thorough and precise in the way official documents are when the people writing them are very serious about what they contain. It also asked, at the very bottom, in language that was carefully formal and carefully polite, and careful in every way, one question that I read 4 times before I was certain I had understood the translation correctly. It read, "The Council requests confirmation. Is the submitted human species file complete and unaltered?" George read it over my shoulder, standing behind my chair. He let out a very long breath through his nose. "What do I say?" I asked. "You say yes," he said quietly, "and then you go, and you sit in that room, and you answer every question they ask you honestly and completely the same way the file answered them. And if they do not like the answers—" He looked at me for a moment, a real look, the kind that takes stock of something. Then he did something I had genuinely never seen George Callum do in 3 years of working together. He smiled. It was small and tired and completely genuine. "Then they do not like the answers," he said, "but they will be true ones, and that is the only kind worth giving." I packed a bag that same afternoon. The Council's transport would arrive the next morning to take me to the orbital station where the full assembly met. Nobody else from our office was going. I would be the first human being to stand before the complete Galactic Council in a formal, high-stakes session. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and looked at my hands for a long time. 411 pages. I kept returning to a moment from 3 days earlier, when I had still been in the middle of compiling the file. I had been in the small archive room on the 2nd floor of our building, surrounded by stacked hard drives and printed reference documents, trying to find a sourced estimate for a specific historical period. An older historian named Dr. Charles Webb had come in to help me locate it. He was 61, white-haired. and had spent his entire academic career studying human civilization across all its periods. He was the kind of person who had read so deeply and so widely that almost nothing surprised him anymore. He had sat down next to me, looked at my screen for a while, and then started to laugh. Not a mean laugh, not a laugh at anyone's expense. A deep, warm, almost helpless laugh, the kind that comes from a place of genuine recognition. "They are going to think we made this up," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at the screen for a while longer, and his laugh settled slowly into a quiet smile that stayed on his face. "Put it all in," he said. "All of it. All of it, Oliver. Every ugly piece and every beautiful piece. The disasters and the recoveries. The worst of us and the best of us. Do not let anyone convince you to leave a single section out." He tapped the desk once with 2 fingers, the way he did when he was finishing a thought and making it permanent. "The whole truth is the only version worth handing to them. Anything less is not really us. It is just a picture of us that we decided to show, and that is not the same thing at all." I thought about Charles Webb the entire ride up to the orbital station. The Earth dropped away beneath the transport window, blue and white and smaller every minute, and I thought about him laughing in that archive room, and I thought about 411 pages of unedited human truth sitting in the Galactic Council's database right now, being read by beings who had never encountered anything quite like it before. The transport docked, the door slid open. A Keth escort was waiting for me in the corridor. She was tall, as all Keth are, with pale gray skin and eyes that were a fraction too large for a human face, but looked completely natural on hers. Her name was Velamara. She had been one of the first Keth diplomats assigned to work with Earth's diplomatic office and had visited our planet twice. She had developed a particular fondness for standing near coffee machines, which she could not consume but found the smell of deeply pleasant. She looked at me when I stepped off the transport, and her expression was something I had not seen on Velamara's face before. Not fear exactly. Not alarm. It was the specific look of someone who has arrived at an event and discovered that the event is significantly larger and more serious than the invitation suggested. "Velamara," I said, "what exactly is happening in that chamber?" She was quiet for a moment. That was unusual. Keth do not tend toward silence. They tend toward precision, which sometimes looks like silence but is actually very careful selection. "They have been reading your file," she said. "I expected that. They have been reading it for 36 hours, without stopping a session to do other business." I paused. "The whole council?" "Most of them. The session was requested jointly by 11 delegations, which has not happened for a routine file review in the 30 years I have worked here." She looked at me with those wide, steady eyes. "I want to prepare you for something before we go in." "All right." "The room is going to be full. Every delegation has sent their complete team. There are species in attendance who have not appeared in general session in years." Another of those careful pauses. "I have worked in this building for 22 years. I have processed hundreds of species profile submissions. I have never seen a file generate this kind of response." I stood in the docking corridor with Earth somewhere beneath me and the full Galactic Council somewhere ahead, and I thought about George Callum saying the only kind worth giving. "Is the file going to cause us a serious problem?" I asked her. She considered the question the way Keth always do. You can see it happening, the visible processing, the turning over before the answer comes out. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "But Oliver, when they ask you questions tomorrow, answer the same way the file does. Do not soften it after the fact. Do not explain it away. If you sent them 411 pages of truth, you go in there and you stand behind every page." "That is exactly the plan," I said. She nodded once. Then she turned and led me down the long corridor toward the council chambers, and I followed, and the door ahead of us grew larger with every step, and I understood somewhere in the part of me that had no diplomatic training and no professional calm that whatever was going to happen next was going to be the most important thing I had ever done. The file was already there waiting for me, the whole 411 pages of it. And so was the galaxy. I had thought about how the clarification session might go. I had run through scenarios in my head on the transport ride up, the same way I used to run through difficult conversations before important meetings, trying to prepare myself for what the questions might be so the answers would come cleanly when the moment arrived. I had imagined polite confusion, a few questions about terminology, maybe some requests to define certain terms that did not translate precisely. I had imagined a formal question period, perhaps 2 hours, a handful of delegates, relatively contained. I had not imagined this. There were 41 delegations in the chamber. Every single one had sent their full complement of representatives. The room seated 300, and when I walked through the main entrance and took my place at the small podium on the center floor, it was close to capacity. 300 alien faces turned toward me at almost exactly the same moment, and the weight of that attention was something I felt physically, like pressure in the chest. Saul Verath, the council chair, called for order 3 times before the room fully settled. He was Marath, which meant he was shorter and broader than most of the other delegates, with deep brown skin and eyes that shifted color in response to his internal state. Velamara had given me a basic guide to Marath eye color before the session. Amber meant concentration and moderate concern. Right now they were a steady, focused amber. "We will conduct this session by section," Saul Verath announced. "The human representative will answer questions from the floor. Delegations will observe standard protocol. We begin with Section 2. The first delegate to stand was Vrelian. His name was Poresthl, and he had the slim, pale blue form and precise movements that Vrelians are known for. Everything deliberate, nothing wasted. He held a data pad in one hand and looked at me over it with eyes that were enormous and very dark. "Your species' recorded history spans approximately 6,000 years, he began. "That is correct. In that period, your file documents over 400 significant organized conflicts between different groups of your own species." "That is also correct." Poresthl looked at me steadily. "Between groups of your own species," he said again, carefully, as if double-checking a translation that seemed too strange to be right. "Yes." "You went to organized conflict against each other." "Yes." "On more than 400 distinct occasions." "Those are only the ones large enough to meet the file's threshold for inclusion," I said. "There were considerably more smaller ones." The room was very quiet. Poresthl looked down at his data pad, then back up at me. "For what reasons?" he asked. There was not a simple answer to that question. There never would be. "Many different reasons across different periods," I said. "Land and resources were frequent causes. Political power and the question of who held authority over whom. Religious belief and the defense of it. Ideology, meaning the organized belief that one way of structuring society was correct and worth defending. Sometimes old grievances passed down through generations that had become more important than their original cause. Sometimes genuine fear of what a neighboring group might do if not confronted first. The reasons changed depending on the period and the people involved. The pattern was not driven by one single motivation." Poresthl sat down. Another delegate rose almost immediately. This was a Keth cultural scholar named Del Voren, young for his profession, with the intense focused energy that younger Keth researchers tend to carry. "Your file includes a detailed section on biological response to threat and challenge," Del Voren said. "Specifically, a compound response your species calls adrenaline. I would like you to walk through its function." I walked through it. I explained the mechanics as clearly as I could. The body's automatic preparation for immediate demand, the increase in heart rate and blood flow, the sharpening of focus, the capacity it unlocks for effort and endurance that sits above what the body can normally sustain. I explained that it is not voluntary and not planned. It activates on its own when the situation requires it. Del Voren made a note. This developed as a response to physical threat from your environment. Originally, yes, predators and immediate physical dangers. But your file indicates it also activates in response to situations that are not physically life-threatening. Competitive activities, difficult creative work, even significant social interactions. That is correct. The body does not always distinguish precisely between types of high-stakes situations. The biological machinery responds to the demand, not the category. Delvoren looked at what he had written. So under conditions of challenge, any significant challenge, your species experiences an involuntary surge of physical and cognitive capacity. More or less, yes. And this is considered functional. It does not cause widespread disorder in your population. I thought about the honest answer to that. It can cause difficulty in some circumstances, yes. But the general effect is that humans tend to increase their effort and endurance when conditions become difficult, rather than reducing them. Difficulty tends to produce more output from us, not less. A low murmur moved through the chamber. Not loud, just the widespread sound of many beings registering the same information at the same time. A new delegate stood before the murmur had fully died down. Marath, from the Council's own cultural observation team, older than most representatives in the room. Her name was Lissara, and she had the silver-streaked scales that Marath develop with age, and the calm manner of someone who has watched a great many things and learned not to react before she has finished watching. Section 5, she said, Military History and Conflict Record. Yes, your military section is 93 pages long. That is correct. The Luminari conflict record, she said evenly, covers a civilization approximately 3 times older than yours. Their conflict section is 11 pages. I am aware that ours is longer by comparison. Considerably longer, she said. A small sound moved through the chamber again. Representative Grant, your file documents organized destruction of cities. You have included documentation, photographs, and population counts. Yes. And then, in the following sections of the same file, you document rebuilding those same cities, sometimes within a generation, sometimes with participation from the same groups involved in the original destruction. Yes, that also happened, in many cases. Lissara was very still for a moment. She had the look of someone working through a calculation that keeps producing an answer that does not match their expectations. Your species destroyed things, she said carefully, and then rebuilt them. Many times throughout history. And in documented cases, the parties responsible for the destruction later engaged in trade with the people whose cities they had destroyed. Frequently, yes. Former enemies becoming trade partners is a recurring pattern in our diplomatic history. And in some of those cases, she continued, still in that same careful tone, those same parties later formed formal agreements for mutual protection. That is what many of our international treaties are, yes, agreements to defend each other. The murmur in the room grew. Saul Vereth did not call for order this time. I suspect he was too busy listening. A new voice from the far right of the chamber, sharp and direct with no build-up. The delegate was from the Shanrak, a species I had limited prior knowledge of. They were physically broad and dark-skinned, with voices that carried naturally across large spaces. This delegate had been watching me from the moment I entered without speaking. His name, he had given at the session opening, was Karavan. Section 6, he said, Cultural Values. Yes. Under the category of core survival mechanisms, your file lists several items. He read from his screen. Hope, determination, the capacity for grief and for joy, an instinct for connection, he paused, and spite. Yes. You listed spite as a survival mechanism. It is an accurate classification. Karavan's expression did not change. His voice did not rise, but the quality of his attention sharpened in a way I could feel from across the room. Explain that. Spite in the human context, I said, is the refusal to fail specifically because someone expects you to fail, or because the situation has made failure seem like the only rational outcome. It is not a dignified motivation. I want to be clear about that. It is not something we are proud of as a defining characteristic. But it is real, and throughout our history it has driven individuals and sometimes entire groups to survive situations where the logical assessment said survival was not possible. Sometimes the only thing keeping a person going is the unwillingness to let the circumstances win. We included it because we said we would be honest. And honestly, spite has kept humans alive on more than one occasion. Karruvan sat down slowly. He said nothing else, but he did not look away. A quieter voice from a different corner. The Shanrek cultural delegate named Myrasol, older than Karruvan, with a stillness about her that marked her as someone who did most of her work in silence. The appendix on early childhood cultural education, she said, specifically the stories. Yes. Your species tells stories to very young children that involve danger, loss, difficult journeys, and threatening figures. Fairy tales, yes. We have told variations of these across almost every culture in our recorded history, going back thousands of years. These are told to children who have no capacity, yet to protect themselves from actual danger. Yes. Myrasol set her data pad down and laced her fingers together on the table. Why? She asked. It was a clean, simple question with a genuine answer behind it. I took a moment before I responded. Because we want them to know early that the world is not always safe, I said. That is true, and we believe they are better served knowing it than not knowing it. But that is only part of the reason. The other reason is that every one of those stories ends with someone facing the difficult thing. Someone small, someone afraid, someone who by every measurement should not be able to succeed. And they find a way. We do not tell our children that danger does not exist. We tell them that it can be faced. That people before them have faced it and found their way through. I looked at Myrasol directly. We think that is more valuable to give a child than protection from the idea of difficulty. Myrasol looked at her hands. She did not say anything for a long moment. Solverath called a recess 20 minutes later. No one left the chamber. I sat at the podium and watched 300 alien representatives lean toward each other in every direction, speaking in low voices in a dozen languages simultaneously. Velamara brought me water and stood near me without speaking, which was more supportive than most words would have been. You are doing well, she said eventually. Are they going to vote against us? I asked her quietly. She was honest in the way she always was. I do not know, but Oliver, that last answer about the stories, she stopped. Something shifted in this room when you said that. I could feel it. I looked out at the chamber full of faces still reading our file, still comparing sections, still working through what it meant that one species could contain so many contradictions and still be standing here. We are not an easy thing to categorize, I said. Velamara made the small sound that for Keth is equivalent to a slow, tired smile. No, she said, you are not easy at all. Solverath called the session back to order. The questions resumed. They asked about medicine and why it developed alongside weapons, whether those two things emerging in the same civilization struck us as contradictory. They asked about music and visual art and why we created them during periods of extreme hardship. They asked why we buried our dead with ceremony rather than efficiency. They asked about laughter and whether it was really an involuntary biological response or something we chose. Every answer I gave was honest. Every answer produced more questions. The session ran for 4 more hours after the recess, and by the end of it the room felt different than it had at the start. Not comfortable, not settled, but different. Like something had been opened and the contents were still being looked at from all sides. The session ended without a vote. Solverath announced a full recess. The duration would be determined by the council's internal deliberation. I walked out of that chamber with every question they had asked me still running through my head, and I knew that whatever came next, the file had already done its work. They had seen us. every page of us. And now the only question was what they were going to do about it. They did not give me a duration for the recess. Velamara told me these things were typically measured in hours. She said 3 days at most, usually much less. The recess lasted 3 days. I stayed on the orbital station. My quarters were comfortable in a spare, functional way. A narrow bed, a desk, a wide window that looked out at a deep scatter of stars with no horizon to interrupt them. They brought me meals at regular intervals and left me largely alone, which was either courtesy or strategy, and I could not tell which. I slept poorly and read what I could find in the station's accessible library, which was not organized for human preferences but was interesting anyway. I spent long stretches at the window, watching the stars and trying to organize my thoughts into something useful. On the first day, I did not hear from anyone. I sent a short update to George Callum, told him the clarification session had concluded and a recess had been called, and that I would report again when I had news. He replied 3 words, "Understood, standing by." I read those 3 words 4 times and found them more comforting than a longer message would have been. I thought about the questions they had asked me. I went through them in order, the way you review a conversation after it ends, checking whether you said what you meant to say or whether some answer had come out slightly wrong, slightly shorter than the truth required. I could not find a place where I had been dishonest. That helped a little. But I kept coming back to one exchange in particular. Lissara, the Marath cultural observer, had asked about medicine, and whether it seemed contradictory to us that we had developed tools to harm people and tools to heal them inside the same civilization at roughly the same time. I had answered that to us it did not feel contradictory, that both came from the same root, the recognition that bodies can break and that the breaking matters. But as I sat at the window watching stars, I wondered if I had said that well enough. I wondered if she had understood what I meant. I thought about how to say it differently if the question came up again. I thought about all the ways the human story could be told, and how each framing was true, and each was incomplete on its own. The whole picture required all of them together, which was exactly why the file had been 411 pages and not 12. On the second day, someone knocked at my door. I was not expecting a visitor. Velamara had told me that the council preferred to limit contact with me during deliberations, to keep the process clean and avoid any appearance of influence. When I opened the door, I found a Keth woman I had not seen before among the station staff. She was older than Velamara, older than most of the Keth I had encountered, with fine silver lines running through the pale gray skin of her face and the backs of her hands, the way Keth show years rather than wrinkles. She carried herself with a specific kind of quiet that was different from the professional stillness of the younger researchers. It was the quiet of someone who has seen a great deal and no longer needs to perform attentiveness because it has simply become how they exist. She gave her name as Scholar Nelavar. She explained that she was a cultural researcher attached to the Council's Academic Review Board, not a delegate, not a voting member. She had filed a formal research access request to speak with me, which had been granted as part of the standard provisions for non-political observers. I invited her in. She sat down at the small table across from me, placed a data pad carefully to one side, not in front of her but to the side, as if it was a reference she might need but was not the point of the conversation. And she looked at me with those wide, unhurried Keth eyes. "I have been reading your file," she said. "I have gathered that most of the station has," I said. "I have been reading it for 37 hours, without significant break." I looked at her, the whole thing. "Twice," she said, "beginning to end twice. I am currently partway through a third reading of the psychological and cultural sections." I did not say anything. I waited because her manner suggested she had arrived at something specific and was going to get to it in her own time. "I want to tell you what is happening in the closed sessions," she said. "This is not information I am authorized to share. I want you to know that. I am sharing it because I believe it matters for what comes next, and because I think you deserve to understand what you are walking into. I appreciate that, I said carefully. The council is deliberating across 3 distinct positions regarding your membership status, she said. Not 2, as these situations usually produce. 3. What are they? She did not hesitate. The first position is restriction, limited membership access, reduced integration into council systems and information sharing, closer monitoring of your civilization's development than any other provisional member has ever been subjected to. This position is held by delegations that read your file and reached the conclusion that a species with your conflict history and your speed of technological development represents a variable they cannot predict reliably. They are afraid of what we might do, I said. They are afraid, she said, of a species that organized itself for conflict repeatedly across its own history and still reached the stars. They are asking what happens when a species with that level of internal drive turns its attention fully outward. She met my eyes. It is not an entirely unreasonable concern. I want to be honest with you about that. I understand it, I said. If I were them, I would probably ask the same question. The second position is full membership with immediate integration. The delegations holding this view read the same file and arrived at a different conclusion. They are not alarmed by your history. They find it significant in a different way. A species that survived what yours survived and still built the institutions you have built, still developed the values you documented, still reached outward rather than collapsing inward. They see that as a profile worth having at the table. They believe your resilience is an asset to the council, not a threat. And the third position, I asked. Nelavar was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the stars. The third position, she said, is not primarily about strategy at all. It is the one that has my colleagues most unsettled, and the one I have been thinking about most since I began reading your file. I waited. Some of the philosophers and cultural scholars on the council, Marath observers, a few luminary researchers, some of my own Keth colleagues, are troubled by something that goes deeper than whether you are a risk or an asset. Your file has forced a question that peaceful, guided civilizations have not had to seriously ask themselves before. What question? Every council species that achieved spaceflight did so through a development path that was relatively stable and internally cooperative. We had guidance or peace agreements or gradual consensus building over centuries. We did not develop the way you did through pressure, through loss and recovery repeated so many times that it became, as your file documents, a core feature of your psychological profile. She paused and looked back at me. And yet here you are, functional, advanced, capable of everything we are capable of, in a fraction of the time, through a path that by every model we have should have ended in self-destruction several times over. I was starting to understand what she was really saying. They are wondering, I said slowly, if the peaceful path is as strong as they thought it was. They are wondering, she said, whether civilizations that developed without being tested the way yours was tested have actually been made stronger by that, or whether they have simply never found out what they cannot withstand. She set her hands flat on the table. Your file does not just describe a different kind of species. It implies a different theory of what makes a civilization capable of surviving a genuinely difficult universe. And some of my colleagues are not comfortable with that implication. The room was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the stars did not change. Nelavor, I said, can I ask you something personal? Yes. What do you think? Not your colleagues, not the council positions. You, having read the file twice and been working on a third reading. She considered it the way Keth do everything. Visibly, carefully, with the patience of someone who believes the quality of the answer depends on the quality of the consideration that precedes it. I think, she said, slowly and with precision, that your file is the most honest document I have ever received from a member species. Every profile we review is curated, deliberately constructed to show a civilization's best understanding of itself, its achievements, its philosophy, its cultural pride. The difficult parts are minimized or absent. The presentation is always a managed one. She looked at me steadily. You sent us everything. The parts that reflect well on your species and the parts that do not. And somehow, reading all of it together, the complete unfiltered picture of what you are and where you came from, it is more compelling than any curated version could have been. Because it is real. I cannot doubt it because you did not try to make it presentable. I looked at the table. She stood and picked up her data pad. At the door she paused. I have one more question, she said, a personal one. Go ahead. Your file documents a recurring pattern across your history. Individuals and sometimes whole communities choosing to release long-held grievances. Not forgetting, your historical records are clear that this is not the same as forgetting, but choosing not to carry the weight of it forward. Across very different cultures and very different circumstances, this pattern appears consistently. Yes. How? She asked simply. How does a species that feels things with the intensity your file describes, that grieves the way you grieve, that is as capable of sustained anger as your history shows, how does it choose that? Where does that come from? I thought about it for a long time before I answered. The honest answer was not short. It does not always choose it, I said. I want to be clear about that. There are cases throughout our history where it did not happen, where the weight was carried forward and made things worse. We have plenty of that too. I paused. But when it does happen, when someone chooses to let go of something they have every reason to hold, I think it comes from a specific understanding. The understanding that the harm that was done to you is already real and already finished. It is a fixed point. Nothing changes it. But what you do with it going forward is not fixed. And carrying it costs something. It costs something from you every day for as long as you carry it. And eventually a person, or a generation, looks at that cost and decides it is higher than what they are protecting by refusing to let go. Nelavar was still. That is not instinct, she said quietly. No, I said, it is not biology, it is a choice. A hard one, but a choice. She nodded very slowly, the way someone nods when they are storing something somewhere specific and careful. I think, she said at last, that the third position in the council debate may have more people in it than the other two realize. She moved toward the door. The session resumes tomorrow morning. Be ready. She left. I sat at the window until the light in the room changed and the stars outside shifted slightly with the station's slow rotation, and I thought about everything she had told me. The three positions, the fear, the pragmatism, the deeper discomfort that came from a question no one wanted to ask out loud. I thought about the third position for a long time, the one that was not about strategy at all, the one that asked whether peace, if it had never been tested, was the same thing as strength. I did not have a clean answer to that. I do not think anyone does. What I knew was that we had not chosen our path. Nobody chooses to have a hard history. It is simply what happened to us, the same way circumstances happen to anyone, and the question is not whether the circumstances were good or bad, but what you did inside them. We had done terrible things inside ours, and we had done remarkable things inside ours, and both were true at the same time, and the combination of both was the actual answer to what we were. Nelavar had called the file the most honest document she had ever received. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about what honesty costs when what is honest is not entirely comfortable. I thought about Charles Webb in the archive room, tapping the desk with 2 fingers and saying the whole truth is the only version worth handing to them. He had been right, but I had not fully understood why until this moment, sitting alone in a quiet room on an orbital station with the galaxy spread outside my window. The whole truth was not just more accurate than a curated version. It was more powerful, because the curated version could be doubted. A version selected for its best moments raised an obvious question. What are you not showing us? But a version that included the difficult parts, the parts no one would choose to share if image were the goal, that version had no obvious question attached to it. You could look at it and know you were seeing the thing itself, not a performance of it. That was the argument Nelavar had been making when she said, I cannot doubt it because You did not try to make it presentable. She had read a document that was honest in the most uncomfortable way, and the discomfort was exactly what made it trustworthy. I sat with that for a while. Then, on the third night of the recess, Velamara sent me a short message. It said only, "Session resumes tomorrow, 900, prepare to speak." I took out a pen and the small notebook I had brought with me. I started writing. Not a formal statement, not a diplomatic prepared address. Just words moving from my hand to the paper, working through what I needed to say and how to say it, and whether I had the nerve to say it honestly when the moment came. I wrote for 2 hours. The station was quiet around me and the stars were steady outside, and the only sound was the pen on the paper. Then I read what I had written. Then I read it again. Then I folded the pages carefully and put them in the inside pocket of my jacket, close to where I could feel them when I moved. And I went to sleep for the first time in 3 days, and in the morning I went back to the chamber. The door was heavier this time. I do not know if it actually was, or if I just knew better what was behind it. I pushed it open and walked in. The chamber was fuller than it had been on any previous day. I noticed that before anything else. The tiered seats curved upward and away in every direction, and every row was occupied. I recognized delegations I had not seen in any prior session. The symbol of the far-reach observers was visible in the upper left section, a species Velamara had once described as preferring to watch everything from a distance and rarely participating directly in council proceedings. They were here in person now. Every seat they held was filled. I walked to the center podium. The room was completely still as I crossed the floor. 300 faces, 300 different kinds of eyes, all of them tracking me as I moved. The weight of it was the same as before but deeper, the way a familiar pressure becomes more real when you know what it means. Solvareth sat at the head of the curved table. He looked at me steadily. His eyes were deep gold. Velamara had not listed deep gold in the guide she gave me. I did not know what deep gold meant for a Marath, and the not knowing sat in my chest in a specific uncomfortable way. "Human Representative Oliver Grant," he said. His voice filled the chamber without effort, the way voices do when a room is designed to carry them. "You have been summoned for the conclusion of the human species file review. The Council will present its deliberation summary. Following that, we will proceed to a formal vote on Earth's membership status." I nodded. "I would like to address the Council before the vote," I said, "if the chair permits." A murmur ran around the room. Solvareth held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, deliberate and unhurried. "You have the floor, Representative Grant." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the folded pages. I unfolded them at the podium, smoothed them flat with one hand, and looked out at the room. 300 faces, every shape and color the galaxy had arrived at, every kind of mind looking back at me. Every one of them had read our file. Every one of them had spent days with our history, our biology, our values, our conflicts, our songs, our disasters, and our recoveries. They knew things about humanity right now that most humans never stop to consider about themselves. I took a slow breath and started. "I know what you read," I said. "I am not going to stand here and ask you to read it differently. Everything in that file is true. The conflicts are true. The organized harm is true. The scale of what we did to each other over the course of our history and the number of times we did it, all of it is true and all of it is documented and none of it is exaggerated." Not a sound in the room. "I know that you have spent 3 days deciding what to do with a species whose conflict record fills 93 pages. I know that some of you are afraid of us. I know that some of you find the idea of bringing us fully into this council to be a risk you would prefer not to take. And I know that some of you have been sitting with a harder question than either of those, one that is less about what we might do to you and more about what it means that we exist at all." I paused. "I am going to speak to all 3 of those things, because you deserve a real answer, not a prepared one." Solvareth was very still. Myrasol in her corner seat had her eyes fixed on me. Karruvan sat with his arms on the table and his full attention forward. "We knew exactly what we were sending when we submitted that file," I said. "My supervisor made the decision, and I want to be clear that he did not make it casually. We could have sent you 12 pages. We could have selected the most impressive sections of our history, our scientific achievements, our art, our philosophy, our most significant acts of courage and cooperation. There are enough of those to fill 12 pages easily, and they would have told a story of a civilization worth respecting. That version exists. We chose not to send it." I looked out at the room. "We sent you everything because we believe something specific, not as a diplomatic strategy, not because it was the clever move. We believe that you cannot build real trust on a curated version of yourself. You can only build real trust by letting someone see the complete picture and deciding to work with you anyway. The version that includes the parts you are not proud of. The version that shows you the way you actually are, not the way you would prefer to be seen." A small sound moved through the room. Not a response, just the ambient sound of people continuing to breathe and listen. "We sent you the conflicts because they happened. We sent you every difficult section of our history because those sections are not separate from who we are. They are part of what made us who we are. And I want to explain what I mean by that, because it is the heart of everything else I am going to say. The hospitals came after the destruction, not despite it, because of it. Because enough people lived through enough loss to understand what it costs to do nothing, and because that understanding became part of our culture and part of our laws, and eventually part of how we teach our children. The peace agreements came after the conflicts. The laws that protect people came after long periods of those same people not being protected. We did not build the good things in spite of our history. We built them from it, from the specific knowledge of what happens when those things are absent." I looked at Delvorin's section of the room, and then at Lysora's. "We are not a safe species. I am not going to stand here and tell you that. We feel things strongly. We push into situations that a more careful assessment might suggest avoiding. We take risks that do not always work out. We have caused harm, and we have a documented capacity to cause more. Our file does not hide any of that, and neither will I." I paused and let that sit for a moment. "But here is what else our file says if you read all 411 pages. Not just the alarming sections, all of them. We are a species that has never stopped. Not once in 6,000 years of recorded history. We have failed. We have gone backward. We have had periods where it looked by any measure like the effort was not working. But the effort itself never ended. The drive to understand more, to build something that lasts, to reach further than we reached before, that thread runs all the way through our history from the first page to the last. Every civilization we have documented, across every era, maintained it. The trying never stopped." I could feel the room in a way I cannot easily describe. Something in the quality of the attention had changed since I started speaking. Not just watching. Something else. Something closer to listening. "I know some of you are afraid that letting us into this council fully is a risk you cannot fully calculate. I understand that. If I were sitting where you are sitting, looking at a file like ours from the outside, I would feel the same thing. A species that built itself up through difficulty and still arrived here is a variable that does not fit any existing model." I looked toward Nelavar's section of the gallery. She was watching me with complete stillness. "And for the others in this room, the ones sitting with a deeper question, I want to say something directly. Your civilizations are remarkable. The peace you built, the systems you created, the consistency of your development, these are genuinely impressive achievements, and I do not want to diminish them. I mean that without qualification. But the galaxy is not always peaceful. You know this better than I do. You have been part of it longer. There are things in this universe that do not respond to diplomacy and do not respect carefully built systems. There are situations that do not resolve through harmony. When those situations come, and they will come, and some of them have come before, you need at this table a species that has been there. That has been in the moment where every calculation says there is no good outcome, and found a way through anyway. A species that has every rational reason to stop and did not stop. I looked at Solvareth. We are the species that destroyed things and then rebuilt them. That made enemies and, over time, forgave them. That invented tools to cause harm and also invented laws to limit that harm. That wrote music in our worst years and kept writing it. That told our children stories about difficulty so they would know that difficulty can be faced. We are full of contradictions. We always have been. We are not going to become simpler. We are not going to become easier to categorize. We are the species that looked at an indifferent universe and decided, not once but across 6,000 years and across more failures than I have counted, that it was worth the continued effort to be kind, that it was worth building things even when they got destroyed, that it was worth trying even when trying had not worked before. I picked up the pages from the podium. We sent you the whole file because we think the whole file is the argument, not in spite of the difficult sections. Because of them. Because a species that can look at its own worst moments and say, yes, that was us, we are not hiding it, that is it, complete and accurate, that is a species you can trust to tell you the truth when the truth matters most. We will not manage what you see of us. We will not show you a clean version and keep the rest behind a door. What is in that file is who we are. And who we are is who you will get. I paused. The room was completely still. We have been building tables for 10,000 years. We know how to sit at one. The question is whether you will let us. I stepped back from the podium. The chamber was completely silent. Not the tense waiting silence of the clarification sessions. Not the careful professional silence of a room maintaining protocol. This was different. The kind of silence that follows something that has landed, that has settled, that has found its place in the room, and is simply sitting there being real. Solvareth looked at me across the length of the chamber floor. His eyes had shifted to a color I had not seen before on any Marath, something between gold and silver, a quiet, still color that Velamara had not listed in her guide. I had no idea what it meant. I hoped it was not bad. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of moment that has weight. Then he turned to the room and said, quietly and without ceremony, the council will vote. I stepped back to the edge of the floor. Velamara was standing just inside the main entrance. When our eyes met, she gave me the smallest possible nod, the kind that carries more than it looks like it does. The Galactic Council's voting process is electronic and simultaneous. Every delegation records their position at the same time, and the result appears in the central display above the main table approximately 90 seconds after the chair calls the vote. 90 seconds. I had stood in rooms waiting for things before. I had waited for test results and for decisions and for people to make up their minds about things that mattered. None of those had felt like this. I stood at the edge of the floor and looked at the display above the table, and I let my mind go quiet. And I waited. I thought about Charles Webb laughing in the archive room, his white hair and his 61 years of history, the warm, helpless sound of him laughing at 400 pages of human truth. I thought about George Callum saying send it in that quiet, immovable voice at 4 in the morning. I thought about Nelavar sitting across from me at the small table, asking me how forgiveness was possible, and the look on her face when I told her it was a choice. I thought about Myrasol putting her data pad down and lacing her fingers together and asking simply why, genuinely wanting to know, genuinely open to the answer. I thought about every question they had asked me across 2 full days of sessions, every section of our file they had examined, every moment where the room had shifted slightly in response to something true. The display shifted. Full membership, no restrictions. Unanimous recommendation from the membership committee, 41 delegations, 41 affirmative votes. I stared at the numbers. They did not change. I looked down at my hands. They were completely steady. That surprised me because I did not feel steady on the inside. On the inside, something had cracked open in the way things do when a pressure that has been building for a very long time is suddenly released all at once. Salverath rose from his seat. The Galactic Council recognizes Earth as a full member, with all rights, responsibilities, and standing of full membership, effective at this moment. A pause, a real one, the kind a person takes when they want to say something correctly. "Welcome," he said, to the table. Around the chamber, sound began. It was not applause. Most of these species did not express acknowledgement the way humans do. It was different in every corner of the room, each species contributing its own version of the same thing. A low, sustained resonance from the Marath section, a rising harmonic from the Luminari, a sharp, clean percussion from the Shanrek. The Keth were silent, but every one of them had raised one hand, which Velamara later told me was the highest formal gesture of recognition in their tradition, reserved for moments of significant meaning. Together the sounds built, layer on layer, until the whole chamber was full of something that was not any one thing but was all of them at once. I felt it more than heard it, the way you feel large sound in your chest before your ears fully process it. Velamara came to stand beside me. She did not say anything. She just stood there, close enough that I knew she was there, which was everything. Nelavar was on the far side of the chamber. I found her through the crowd, and when she saw me looking, she gave me a very small, very deliberate nod. The kind that contains full sentences. I know. I understand. This is what I thought it would be. Myrasol was speaking quietly to Karavan. As I watched, she stopped and turned and looked at me across the distance, and her expression had the quality of something long held finally released. Karavan, beside her, nodded once toward me, a single firm movement that in his culture I suspected meant something close to respect. Delvoran, the young Keth researcher, had his data pad out and was writing rapidly, which I found somehow deeply satisfying. Lissora from the Marath observation team caught my eye and held it for a moment before inclining her head. Porethel, the Vrelian delegate who had been the first to question me, stood and looked at me from across the floor. He was not the kind of person whose face moved much, but something in his posture had changed since the beginning of the first session, some quality of the watchful, careful tension he had carried throughout. It was quieter now. Not gone, just quieter. I stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber on the day humanity became a full member, and I thought about 411 pages. Every conflict and every treaty, every disaster and every recovery, every time we built something and every time we lost it and every time we built it again. Every generation that carried forward the thread of trying even when the trying was not going well. Every person who ever chose, in the middle of a situation that offered them every reason not to be kind anyway. It was not a perfect record. It never would be. That was not the point of it. It was ours, completely, without edits, without the comfortable sections selected and the rest filed away. Every page of it was ours, and we had handed it over without hiding a single word, and the full assembly of the galaxy's civilizations had looked at the whole truth of what we were and said yes. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the folded pages. I held them in my hand for a moment, just held them, feeling the weight of the paper and what it meant. Then I put them back carefully and left them there. Some things you keep. Not because they are impressive, not because they prove something, because they are real and because being real is enough, and because the day will come when you need to remember that honesty, even in its most uncomfortable form, is a foundation you can actually stand on. The sound in the chamber gradually settled. Delegates began to move, conversations starting up, the formal stillness of the session dissolving into the ordinary motion of people who have been sitting a long time and are finally allowed to move. Velamara touched my arm lightly. "There will be a formal reception," she said. "Protocol requires your attendance." "I know," I said. "Are you ready?" I looked at the room one more time. The display above the main table still showed the result. 41 votes, no restrictions, effective immediately. "Yes," I said, "I am ready." The door to the chamber opened, and I walked forward into whatever came next, carrying the whole file with me. Every page of it, every honest, unedited, complicated, remarkable page. The galaxy had asked us who we were. We had told them. And they had said, "Come in, sit down, you belong here." After 10,000 years of building tables, we finally had a seat at one that mattered. And we had earned it the only way anything worth having is ever truly earned. By showing up as exactly what we were, without apology, without performance, without hiding a single thing. The whole truth. All 411 pages of it.